The shout cracked through the quiet lobby like a gunshot, halting the morning rush and shattering the illusion that everything inside Silvercore Technologies always ran perfectly. Ethan Walker stepped out of the service corridor with an old metal toolbox in hand, unaware that within seconds, the trajectory of his quiet, invisible life would shift. Above him, fluorescent panels hummed coldly, as if the building itself were waiting to witness something long overdue. He had come only to fix a faulty thermostat on the 7th floor. But fate had chosen this precise moment to open a wound 10 years old. Madison Hale, the 30-something CEO, with glacier-sharp posture and a reputation polished by ruthlessness, froze mid-stride when her gaze stabbed the faded emblem on the lid of his toolbox. The silver grid logo had survived years of scratches and dents, a ghost of the company's earliest identity, before rebranding swallowed it whole. She narrowed her eyes, confusion hardening instantly into suspicion. Around her, employees slowed like a tide, retreating from the shoreline sensing drama the way animals sense lightning before it strikes. When she spoke, her voice carried an edge that sliced clean through the hallway's routine blur. "Why is my company's original logo on your toolbox?" Ethan paused only long enough to meet her stare. His expression was unreadable, carved from a decade of learning how to live unnoticed. "Because I built it before you bought it." The words landed without theatrics, quiet yet thunderous. And for a heartbeat, the entire lobby turned still. Madison blinked, stunned, not by volume, but by certainty. Those around her exchanged smirks, assuming he was joking, deflecting, maybe even lying to avoid trouble. After all, what power could a night shift technician possibly claim? No one knew the man behind the coveralls. No one imagined that the faded emblem he carried was more truthful than any of them dared guess. She stepped closer, heels slicing against stone tiles, irritation pulsing through every movement. Her company had no room for anomalies, especially ones carried by men who blended into hallways like shadows. Containment was her habit. Control was her language. "Where did you get it?" Before he could answer, a junior manager chimed in with a half-laughing whisper, probably stolen from storage, the kind of careless cruelty that thrives in corporate corridors. The remark stung the air more than it stung Ethan. He had been underestimated for so long that insults felt like background noise. Yet something inside Madison tightened a coil winding. His calmness unsettled her the way a locked door unsettles someone who believes she owns every key. She raised a hand, and security moved instinctively trained to respond before thought caught up. One guard reached for Ethan's arm, another for the metal toolbox, as employees watched openly, now hungry for spectacle. Even the air seemed to shift, the temperature dropping with the tension. Ethan did not resist. He stood with the quiet patience of a man who had learned long ago that fighting back only fed the fire. The guard pried open the box. Tools clinked to wrench wire cutters, a soldering pen items worn from use, but clean, organized, purposeful. No stolen equipment, no hidden device. Just the life of a man who worked with his hands, not his ego. Yet the truth irritated Madison more than if he had been caught red-handed. An unexplained anomaly was worse than a crime. "Check his file," she ordered. HR scrambled, swiping through records, feeding her scraps of information. Ethan Walker hired 3 years ago on a maintenance contract. Clean background check, prior work at small repair shops. Nothing remarkable, nothing extraordinary, nothing to justify his claim that he built anything she now owned. But Ethan felt something else swirling beneath the surface of the room, a pressure, a weight, a familiar burning in his chest as old memories lurched awake. The lobby with its glass walls and polished steel seemed to tilt slightly, like the past threatening to bleed into the present. He had not intended to speak today. He had not intended to be seen at all. Life as a single father demanded invisibility. Visibility cost too much. Madison examined him with a sharper intensity now, half curiosity, half suspicion. She wanted him to flinch, to retract, to admit he had spoken nonsense so the world could snap back into the neat lines she preferred. But Ethan's silence was steadfast. When he finally spoke again, his voice remained calm enough to provoke unease. "I told you the truth. I built that logo. I built more than that. And you, Miss Hale, bought it years after it was taken from me." His composure fractured the room. Employees exchanged startled glances. A technician near the elevator stopped breathing for a moment. Even the security guard holding Ethan's arm loosened his grip. This was no bluff delivered by a desperate man. This was a truth worn thin by time, heavy and real. Madison felt something unexpected crawl up her spine, not fear, but a slow dawning recognition that this stranger was not playing by the rules she understood. She drew a breath, meant to steady her authority. "Enough. If you are lying, you will be removed. If you stole company property, you will be prosecuted." She motioned toward the guards. "Escort him out." But before they could react, a new voice broke through the tension, steady yet trembling with disbelief. "Wait." Everyone turned. Dr. Samuel Reyes, a senior engineer with white-flecked hair and hands marked by decades of precision work, pushed through the crowd. His eyes locked on Ethan, widening as if he were seeing a ghost rise from the debris of forgotten history. Ethan Walker. When Ethan offered the smallest nod, Samuel's face drained of color. "Oh my God, it is you." A ripple moved through the lobby as realization flickered from person to person. Not a janitor, not an anonymous repairman. Something else. Someone else. A plot twist waiting 10 years to surface. And just like that, the world Madison Hale had built from glass and iron cracked, not loudly, but with the soft, devastating certainty of truth returning to claim its place. For a long moment after Samuel Reyes spoke, the lobby of Silver Core Technologies held its breath. It was as if the building itself recognized the name. He uttered a name buried beneath years of silence, a name that did not belong to a janitor, but to a man who once shaped the company's beating heart. Madison Hale felt a strange tremor inside her chest, a mix of disbelief and something far less comfortable doubt. She had trained herself to sense power shifts long before they arrived. Yet nothing had prepared her for the sudden tilt of gravity around this quiet man. Ethan Walker did not look triumphant. He did not even look relieved. He simply existed in the center of the storm, calm as stone, as if he had lived through far worse upheavals than this public unmasking. Samuel pushed closer, ignoring the stares gathering behind him. His voice shook with recognition. "Ethan, my God, we thought you had disappeared. You built the first stabilizer core, the entire load balancing design. You kept the prototype alive when all of us thought it would collapse." His words spilled out like a confession, like a truth he regretted holding for so long. The employees who had laughed earlier now shrank into uneasy silence. They had mocked a man standing on ground none of them had ever touched. Their faces tightened with embarrassment. But Madison was not embarrassed. She was unsettled. There was a difference. She stepped forward, her voice tightening into its familiar commanding edge. "How do you know him, Samuel? And why would he claim to be someone he clearly is not?" Her tone carried authority, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. She needed an answer that restored order, something that bent reality back into shape. Yet Samuel only looked at her with the weariness of a man who had watched an injustice stretch across too many years. "He is one of the original founders of Silvergrid," he said quietly, referring to the small garage startup that later evolved into Silvercore. He built the framework this company stands on. Without him, none of this would exist. The air in the room seemed to thicken, oppressive and heavy. Madison felt heat rise beneath her collar. Founders were not janitors. Founders did not vanish and then reappear sweeping hallways. Yet there he stood, the contradiction made flesh. Ethan shifted slightly, not from discomfort, but from a tired resolve. He rarely wished to speak of the past, but the past had arrived anyway. He locked eyes with Madison, and she sensed it again, authority dormant, but not lost. "I told you the truth," he said softly. "I am not here to reclaim anything. I am here because life demanded something simpler from me than this place ever could." It was not defiance nor plea. It was acceptance, and somehow that tone cut deeper than anger would have. Madison's chest tightened in a way she did not appreciate. She prided herself on clarity, on cutting straight to the motive beneath every gesture. But Ethan's intentions were maddeningly clean. If power was a language, he was fluent in the version that required no raising of voice, no showcasing of credentials. It was exactly what made him dangerous. She drew a breath, regaining her composure. Security release him. The guards hesitated, thrown off balance by the sudden shift in authority between the man they held and the engineer who defended him. When they obeyed, Ethan rubbed his wrist lightly, not in pain, but in memory. He had been restrained before not by guards, but by signatures, contracts, the brutal indifference of men who once stood beside him. Madison tried to salvage control. "This company has detailed records. If what you are saying is true, then there will be documentation, founders' agreements, patent filings, something." Her voice quickened, a sign she was thinking faster than she was speaking. "Samuel, get to HR. Find every archived file with Ethan's name on it. Now." She needed facts. Facts were firm ground. Truth, she was learning, was a far more unstable terrain. Samuel nodded, but before he turned, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. There was grief in that touch, unspoken apology threaded through it. "We thought you abandoned the company. After your wife passed, everything changed. You withdrew. You stopped coming to meetings. And when the buyout papers came," Samuel hesitated, pain flickering across his features. "You signed without reading them. You were grieving. We all failed you." A ripple of shock moved through the watching crowd. Madison felt the world rearranging itself under her feet. Ethan's quietness was no longer passivity. It was survival. His disappearance had not been abandonment. It had been escape, perhaps the only one he could manage while holding an infant daughter in his arms. It was then Ethan spoke with the softest but most devastating clarity. "I did not disappear. I just stopped mattering." The words landed like falling stone. Even Madison inhaled sharply. In them she heard the outline of a story she did not yet know, a story that did not fit into her neat corporate frameworks. She straightened, realizing suddenly that the audience around them needed dispersing. She would not allow the inner workings of her company or her own shaken composure to become a spectacle. "Everyone return to your stations. Now." Her voice cracked like a whip, and the spell broke. Employees scattered, murmuring as they went, carrying the fragments of revelation with them like contraband. Soon only a handful remained: Madison, Samuel, the guards, and Ethan. For the first time, Madison saw him not as an intrusion in her day, but as a riddle threaded through the very foundation of her company. She nodded to Samuel. "Bring me everything. Every contract, every founder's memo, every prototype record. If there is truth here, I intend to see it." Ethan closed his toolbox gently, as if the motion itself bore history. He met Madison's eyes one last time before walking toward the elevator. Something in that gaze unsettled her all over again. He did not fear her authority. He did not bow to her power. He simply existed beyond the boundaries of where she could place him. And for the first time in years, Madison Hale realized she might not be the most formidable presence in her own building. The elevator doors slid shut behind Ethan Walker with a soft, metallic sigh, leaving Madison Hale alone in the echo of everything she had just witnessed. The lobby was returning to life, but her world felt strangely suspended, distorted by the weight of a truth she had not invited and was not prepared for. She turned sharply toward Samuel Reyes, who was gathering the stunned fragments of his composure. Her voice was low controlled, but charged with a tension that hummed beneath every syllable. I want every file linked to Silvergrid in my office within 30 minutes. All archives, all partnership agreements, all patent histories. If there is even a sliver of truth in what he said, I need to see it with my own eyes. Samuel nodded, already moving, but he paused long enough to offer a weary warning. Madison, this will not be a simple search. Those early years were chaotic. Records were moved, merged, reclassified. Some may have been buried. His gaze flicked toward the elevator. And some may have been buried intentionally. She stiffened at that. Intention was a word she knew all too well. Silvercore's history had been curated, polished, smoothed into a narrative fit for shareholders. Yet the man who had just walked away carried a different history, one that felt raw and unsettlingly real. In her private office on the top floor, glass walls wrapped the space in a panoramic sweep of Seattle's skyline. Usually the view calmed her, grounding her in altitude and authority. Today it felt like a silent tribunal watching her unravel what she should have already known. Files spilled across her desk as HR and legal assistants rushed in and out, arms full of documents long untouched. Madison tore through them with a surgeon's intensity, dissecting every signature, every dated page, every footnote that hinted at the company's earliest heartbeat. Ethan's name appeared more often than she expected. Technical drafts, initialed EW, early patents listing him as primary inventor. A photograph of 3 men in a cramped garage, one of them Ethan younger, brighter, holding a metal prototype with a pride that was almost painful to look at. He had been the center of the picture. The others positioned themselves beside him, the way people gravitate towards the source of light. Yet, somewhere between that moment and the present, his light had been extinguished or perhaps smothered. She found the buyout agreement next. A single sheet with signatures near the bottom, Ethan's among them, shaky and uneven, dated only weeks after a tragic accident involving his wife. The accompanying email from the remaining founders was polite, but cold, stating that Ethan's emotional state made continued involvement difficult. The buyout amount was shocking in its smallness, an insult masked as compensation. Madison felt something sharp twist inside her, an anger that did not belong to the CEO protecting her company, but to the daughter of a man who believed integrity mattered. Her father had acquired Silvergrid many years later, and she had always assumed he did so honorably. Now she was not so certain. A knock pulled her from her thoughts. It was Samuel holding a worn leather notebook, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed. He set it gently on her desk, as though placing down a relic. This was Ethan's. He kept notes on every design, every idea. He left it behind the night he walked out. Madison opened the notebook carefully. Inside were sketches, formulas, fragments of innovation brimming with possibility. There were also entries written in a tight, slanted script. Some chronicled breakthroughs. Others chronicled the slow collapse of a man grieving while trying to build something that would outlive him. One entry struck Madison with unexpected force. It read, "If the world forgets my name, let it at least remember the things I built. My daughter deserves a father who shows up, not a ghost chasing credit." She closed the notebook slowly, an ache blooming behind her sternum. Ethan had not abandoned the company. He had abandoned the version of himself that could not breathe without breaking. Yet even as compassion crept in, another instinct rose like a rival flame. How had he hidden here for so long? Why return now? Why stay in a place built on the bones of his stolen legacy? The pieces did not align with the ruthless logic she trusted. She needed answers, not sentiment. As afternoon light stretched across her office, Madison made a decision. Truth could not remain trapped in files and faded notebooks. She needed to hear it from the man himself. She left her office with a stride sharpened by purpose, heading toward the service wing where Ethan typically worked. But as she turned a corner of the marble hallway, she collided with a small cluster of employees whispering nervously. They stepped aside instantly, their eyes avoiding hers. Their fear irritated her. Their avoidance intrigued her. When she reached the maintenance level, she found Ethan's workstation empty, except for the old metal toolbox resting on the table. Its faded emblem caught the overhead light glowing faintly like a stubborn reminder of something that refused to be erased. She touched the lid, tracing the scratched outline of the logo with her fingertip. It felt both familiar and foreign, like something she should have recognized but never bothered to see. A soft sound echoed down the hallway. Footsteps. She turned and found Ethan standing a few yards away, holding a replacement circuit panel. His expression was neutral, neither surprised nor intimidated. He looked like a man who had nothing left to fear because he had already survived the worst of it. Madison stepped forward, but her practiced composure wavered when she tried to speak. "I read the records," she said finally. Her voice betrayed no apology, but the tension beneath it revealed everything she refused to admit. "I know who you are now." Ethan set the panel aside, not out of reluctance, but out of respect for a conversation that would not be brief. "I have never lied about who I am," he answered gently. "I simply stopped offering the truth to people who did not want it." His calmness struck her harder than anger would have. She had expected resentment, accusation, vindication. But Ethan's serenity made her feel exposed, as though he could see the cracks in her confidence. She drew a steadying breath. "Why did you not come forward? Why let yourself fade into the background of the company you created?" Ethan paused long enough for silence to settle into something intimate. "Because titles do not raise a child," he said. "And because the past asked more of me than I had left to give." Madison struggled to form her next question. Power she understood. Strategy she mastered. But this quiet defiance, this surrender to something larger than ambition, felt like a foreign language. Before she could speak again, Ethan added softly, almost as if granting her a truth she was not ready to receive. "You cannot fix what happened, Miss Hale. What is done is done." The words were not meant to wound, yet they carved through her certainty all the same. In that stillness, Madison realized the plot twist she had never expected. The man she thought was beneath her was the only one in the building who carried nothing to prove and nothing to fear. A man who had lost everything once and still stood unbroken. And for the first time in her meticulously controlled life, Madison Hale understood she was no longer asking questions to assert power. She was asking because the truth suddenly genuinely mattered. That night, long after most of Silvercore's employees had abandoned the glass tower for the comfort of their homes, Madison Hale remained in her office, the city stretched beneath her like a constellation of unsolved questions. Lights flickered across the skyline, but none of them offered clarity. She leaned against the window, her reflection faint, her authority feeling strangely hollow. She had spent years perfecting control, sculpting a legacy that matched her father's ambition. Yet all it took was one quiet man with an old toolbox to reveal how fragile her certainty truly was. She replayed their conversation over and over, searching for something he had not said. Ethan Walker was not evasive, but he was careful, shaping truth like someone who had lived long enough to understand its cost. His calmness irritated her as much as it intrigued her. People fought for credit, clawed for status, begged for recognition. But Ethan wanted none of that, which made him all the more impossible to categorize. A man without ambition was either broken or whole beyond comprehension. She did not yet know which one he was. On her desk lay the notebook Samuel had recovered, its worn pages open to sketches of a prototype that bore uncanny resemblance to Silver Core's current stabilizer models. Ethan had built the foundation years before the company ever adopted it. She traced a line drawn in precise strokes, imagining him bent over a workbench in that cramped garage, believing in something no one else could see. He had gifted the company its heartbeat, and in return, it had forgotten him. A knock startled her. Samuel Reyes entered holding a thin folder. His face carried a heaviness. She recognized the burden of knowing too much. He hesitated before speaking, perhaps unsure how much truth she was prepared to hear. "Madison," he began, "there is something else you should see." He set the folder down, and she opened it to find a series of internal memos from over a decade earlier. Words jumped from the page with quiet cruelty. Concerns about Ethan's grief, discussions about company stability, proposals to remove him from leadership until he was, as one partner wrote, emotionally functional. Madison felt her stomach drop. Her father's signature appeared on a later memo urging empathy, but acknowledging strategic necessity. No one wanted to say the quiet part aloud, but it was there in every line. Ethan had been pushed out not because he lacked vision, but because he had suffered. They punished him for being human. They reshaped the company by erasing the man whose hands built their future. She closed the folder with a slow exhale. The room felt smaller now, shrinking under the weight of inherited guilt. "I need to speak with him again," she murmured. Samuel nodded, though concern edged his features. "He is a private man, Madison. If you push too hard, he will retreat. And if you do nothing," she answered, "this company will remain built on a wrong we never corrected." Down on the 7th floor, Ethan was finishing a repair on an industrial printer, his movements steady and practiced. The quiet hum of the machine suited him. Work was simple. Machines did not lie or betray or demand explanations. They responded to patience, not politics. He preferred it that way. Yet he sensed someone behind him before he heard her speak. "I read everything Madison said." Her voice lacked its usual blade-like sharpness. It sounded almost human. Ethan turned slowly, wiping grease from his fingers with a cloth. He looked tired, though not from the work, from the past clawing its way back into the present. "You should not blame yourself for decisions made before your time," he said gently. But she shook her head. "That is not enough. I run this company now, and I refuse to let its foundation rest on silence and injustice." He studied her for a long moment, seeing something new in her eyes, something he had not expected: humility. "What do you want from me?" he asked. His tone was not defensive, simply curious. Madison hesitated. Power, she could negotiate alliances, she could strategize, but this conversation demanded vulnerability, something she had long considered a liability. "I want the truth written into our history. I want the company to acknowledge what you built. And I want to make this right." Ethan's expression did not change. But something in his posture softened. He set down the wrench he had been holding, as if relieved to place a burden elsewhere. "You cannot restore what was lost," he said softly. "My wife is gone. Those years are gone. The company moved on without me, and I moved on without it." Madison stepped closer, trying to match his calm. "But you still came back. You still chose to work here." Why that question more than anything revealed her need for understanding. In her world, people returned only for power or revenge. Ethan returned for neither. He looked at the machine he had just repaired, watching its steady rhythmic motion. Because it was familiar, he answered. Because I needed stability for my daughter. Because anonymity gave me peace. The old company was gone. This was simply work, nothing more. But it was not nothing to her. It was a revelation she could not dismiss. "There is a board meeting tomorrow," Madison said. "I want to present the truth. Your truth. I want the company to recognize you properly." Ethan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in the kind of fear only fathers understood. Attention brought consequences, and consequences threatened the stability he fought to preserve for his daughter. He shook his head slowly. "No, I cannot invite chaos into my life again. And I will not have Emily dragged into the spotlight because of choices I made 10 years ago." His refusal struck her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to protest, but he lifted a hand gently. "You are trying to fix something that cannot be undone. Sometimes even the right intentions lead to the wrong outcomes." Madison felt something crumble, a frustration built not from ego, but from helplessness. She had never failed to correct a problem once she set her mind to it. But this man, with his quiet dignity and measured boundaries, was not a problem. He was a truth she could not command. Ethan offered a faint, tired smile. "Let the past rest, Miss Hale." But as he walked away, toolbox in hand, Madison Hale understood something with startling clarity. The past was not resting. It was rising, and she would not let it bury him again. The following morning broke cold and metallic over Seattle, the kind of dawn that sharpened every edge of the city. Madison Hale arrived at Silvercore hours before her staff, her heels echoing through empty corridors, still asleep in dim amber light. She had not slept. The night had been a relentless parade of thoughts, a tangle of outrage, guilt, and an unfamiliar ache she refused to name. Her mind replayed Ethan's refusal, his quiet resignation to a past she believed could and should be corrected. He did not want recognition, but she needed the truth to stand. It was more than justice. It was the only way she could continue leading this company without feeling like an imposter wearing a crown built on someone else's suffering. By the time the first employees trickled in, Madison was seated at the head of the executive conference table, a stack of documents spread before her. The board members began to arrive, their polished shoes tapping across marble floors, their expressions groggy but already calculating. They expected a routine quarterly briefing. Instead, they entered a storm forging itself off in the quiet. At precisely 8 o'clock, Madison rose. The room hushed. She addressed them with a steadiness that disguised the turmoil beneath. "There is something the board needs to hear. Something long overdue." She began with the history of Silvergrid, the original company her father acquired. She spoke of innovation, of early prototypes of the technical brilliance, credited to 2 co-founders whose names appeared on every plaque in the lobby. Then she placed Ethan's notebook on the table. It looked small, worn, almost unimpressive among sleek laptops and shining glass. But when she opened it, the room felt as if it shifted. Gentle gasps escaped. The sketches, the formulas, the annotations, every page whispered the same truth. The missing founder had not been missing at all. He had simply been erased. One board member, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Riggs, leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Where has this notebook been? Who recorded these designs?" Madison answered without hesitation. "Ethan Walker. He is here, working as a maintenance technician." Silence fell so deeply that it felt like a crack in the world. Another board member scoffed in disbelief. Impossible. Why would a man of that caliber hide in plain sight? Why would he choose anonymity over influence? Madison bristled not from the skepticism, but from how easily they dismissed a man they had never met. "Because he suffered a loss you will never understand," she said. "And because this company gave him no reason to stay." Across the table, a senior board member named David Langford, her father's oldest advisor, slid his glasses off, polishing them slowly. His voice carried a weight that silenced even Clara. "Are you saying your father knew about this?" The question lodged in the air like a blade. Madison swallowed hard. "I found his signature on internal memos about Ethan's removal. He acted out of fear that the company would fall apart under leadership instability. That does not excuse what happened, but it explains it." A murmur rippled. Some nodded grimly. Others shifted uneasy with the moral quicksand forming beneath them. Finally, Clara asked the question cracking beneath the tension. "What do you expect us to do?" Madison closed the notebook with deliberate care. "Acknowledge him. Publicly. Restore his rightful place in the company's history." The response was immediate and sharp. "Impossible. Unnecessary. Potentially damaging. Risk of litigation. Risk of destabilizing investor confidence." The objections clattered like coins dropped onto a steel tray. And then David leaned back, studying Madison with eyes too perceptive. "But you have already spoken to him, have you not?" "Yes." "And what did he say?" "He refused." David sighed, nodding once, as though a private conclusion had been confirmed. "Then perhaps the matter should end there." She stiffened. "No. This board does not get to dictate the legacy of a man who built the core of everything we profit from today. We cannot continue pretending he does not exist." Clara spoke again, gentler now. "Madison, you are asking us to announce to the world that Silvercore's foundation rests on a wrong decision made decades ago. Investors will demand answers. Competitors will call us unstable. Ethan himself wants no attention. Why push for something he does not want?" Madison inhaled slowly, steadying herself before she said the words, tightening inside her. "Because truth is not optional. Because leadership is not about convenience. Because I will not build my future on another man's buried past." A long stillness followed. Some board members exchanged resigned glances. Others looked away. David's expression softened with reluctant respect. Whether he agreed or not, he understood her resolve had crystallized into something immovable. When the meeting adjourned, Madison stepped out into the hallway, adrenaline still vibrating beneath her skin. She had won nothing. She had also not lost. But the truth was no longer contained. It was awake, and the board, whether they liked it or not, now carried it too. On the 7th floor, Ethan was adjusting the calibration of an air duct system when Samuel appeared, breathless. "The board knows," Samuel said quietly. Madison told them everything. Ethan froze. A faint weariness washed across his face. He closed the panel with a soft click. "That was never her burden to carry," he murmured. Samuel shook his head. "She chose it." Ethan looked away, gripping the edge of the ladder. He understood precisely what the board's knowledge meant. exposure, attention, questions, none of which his daughter needed. "Madison must not do this," he whispered. But even as the words left his mouth, the opposite truth settled heavily inside him. Madison Hale had begun something she would not stop. Not now. Not ever. And for the first time since returning to Silvercore, Ethan felt the quiet trembling of fate shifting again, pulling him toward a reckoning he had tried for 10 years to outrun. The day after the board meeting, tension seeped through Silvercore like a rising tide. Rumors drifted from department to department, whispers of a janitor, whose name carried more weight than the executives who towered above him. Ethan Walker felt those whispers trailing behind him as he moved through the building, repairing a flickering light here, a sputtering vent there. The air seemed charged, as if the walls themselves anticipated another shift. He kept his head down, but the quiet he relied on was cracking. Every footstep felt louder. Every glance lingered too long. The life he built around invisibility was dissolving. When he returned to the maintenance office, his supervisor, Marcus Dale, waited with stiff shoulders and a conflicted expression. He gestured toward a stack of printed memos on the desk. "Ethan, you need to see this." Ethan read the top page and felt his stomach tighten. It was a scheduled announcement for an all-staff meeting the next morning. Attendance mandatory. Subject company history and acknowledgement of foundational contributions. He felt heat rise in his chest, followed by the sinking weight of inevitability. "She is going to do it," Marcus murmured. "She is going to say your name." Ethan closed the memo slowly. "This cannot happen." Marcus looked at him with a mix of awe and worry. "Man, I do not know what you were before, but you are making powerful people nervous." Ethan shook his head. "I am making my daughter vulnerable. That is what matters." The world Ethan fled years ago had teeth. Publicity had shadows. He could not allow his past to reach Emily. That was the promise he made to his wife's memory the night everything shattered. He left the office needing air. The service elevator opened onto the executive floor, and before he could retreat, Madison Hale stepped out of her corner office. Her expression froze for a fraction of a second, then shifted into a careful, controlled determination. "Ethan, we need to talk." He stiffened, realizing the inevitable confrontation had arrived sooner than he hoped. Madison approached with the poise of someone who had spent the night preparing an argument. But her eyes carried an undercurrent of vulnerability that unsettled him far more than steel ever could. "You saw the memo," she began. "Yes. I cannot let you go through with this." Her jaw tightened. "Ethan, the truth belongs to the company, not only to you." He met her gaze unflinching. "No. The truth belongs to the people shaped by it. My daughter has already lost enough. If you pull this into the light, her life will be flooded by a past she did not choose." Madison inhaled sharply. "This is not about exposure. This is about justice." He almost laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Justice does not raise a child, Miss Hale." She faltered, her confidence cracking at the edges. Then her voice softened into something dangerously close to pleading. "I cannot run this company knowing its foundation is a lie. I cannot build a future on the erasure of the man who built its beginning." Ethan stepped back as though the words were flames. "I do not need credit. I need peace and safety." She swallowed, realizing finally that every choice he made revolved around a girl she had never met, a child whose existence rewrote the entire narrative. "What is her name?" Madison asked quietly. Ethan hesitated, but the truth escaped before he could restrain it. "Emily. She is 9. Madison absorbed that her voice gentler still. You have protected her alone for so long. But do you truly believe silence will protect her forever? He stiffened. Silence is the only thing that has. They stood facing one another, two people shaped by different battles, yet bound now by the same truth. Madison stepped forward, slow-measured. I will not let this company define you by what was stolen. I will define it by what you gave. He shook his head. And I am telling you that your attempt to honor me will hurt the person I would die to protect. Her expression shifted, sharpened, and then unexpectedly softened. Ethan, listen. I cannot undo the past, but I can ensure this company no longer carries the stain of burying its own creator. He held her gaze, breathing hard. And I cannot let you turn my life into a headline. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hallway hummed with fluorescent lights and consequences. Finally, Madison stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, what do you want me to do? Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Cancel the meeting. Let the story die. Madison's silence stretched heavy and conflicted. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of an impossible decision. I do not know if I can. Ethan nodded once slowly, as if accepting a fate he could not control. Then understand this. If you force the truth into the open, you may save your conscience. But you could break my family. He turned away before she could see the grief rising in his eyes. And for the first time since she became CEO, Madison Hale realized that leadership was not about choosing right over wrong. It was about choosing whom you were willing to hurt in the process. The morning of the all-staff meeting arrived with a kind of trembling hush that seemed to settle even in the steel beams of Silvercore's headquarters. Employees filed into the auditorium with murmured curiosity, unaware of the storm unfolding behind closed doors. On the 15th floor, in a conference room washed in pale winter light, Ethan Walker stood facing Madison Hale for what felt like the final time. Neither spoke at first. Silence pressed between them like a wall neither could climb without consequence. Madison had not canceled the meeting. That truth hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. Her expression carried the strain of someone trying to reconcile duty with empathy, legacy with humanity. Ethan saw exhaustion around her eyes, the kind that comes from fighting battles not everyone can see. Still, he could not let sympathy weaken his resolve. He had lived through the unraveling of a life once before. He would not let it happen again. Madison finally broke the silence. I could not cancel it, she said quietly. The board is expecting a statement. The staff knows something is happening. If I back down now, they will sense weakness. Ethan's jaw tightened, anger surfacing only in the smallest shifts of muscle. You are the CEO of this company. You answer to no one but yourself. Weakness would be choosing pride over compassion. Her breath caught, wounded by the accusation. This is not pride. This is responsibility. The truth deserves daylight. He shook his head. Truth without context becomes spectacle. My daughter deserves safety. That is the only truth that matters. She stepped closer, the desperation in her voice barely contained. I am trying to fix what was broken. Why can you not see that he met her gaze, his own voice low, but unwavering? Because you are trying to fix the wrong thing. You want to rewrite history. I want to protect the present. Those two goals do not belong in the same room. Madison exhaled slowly, frustration and heartbreak twisting through her composure. She walked toward the window, staring down at the employees streaming into the building like a river of expectation. Do you know what happens to a company that hides the truth? It corrodes from within. just like people. She turned to face him again. My father taught me that leadership demands courage. But courage means more than standing on a stage and confessing a mistake. It means facing the consequences of what must be done. Ethan's voice softened, not in surrender, but in quiet, devastating conviction. And being a father means fighting every day to keep consequences as far away from your child as possible. You believe this is about you and me, but it is not. My daughter is 9 years old. She has lived through more loss than any child should. Public attention, legal battles, media storms, these things will not heal the past. They will shatter her present. Madison closed her eyes at the mention of Emily. Something inside her shifted, as though the weight of Ethan's fear finally began to settle in her own chest. She had always admired people who fought relentlessly for their goals. But here stood a man whose greatest strength was knowing what he could not afford to lose. It humbled her. It frightened her. It forced her to confront the limits of her own understanding. Before she could speak again, Samuel Reyes entered the room breathless. Madison, the auditorium is filling fast. We need to begin in 10 minutes. His eyes met Ethan's with a mixture of guilt and reluctant admiration. Ethan nodded once, understanding that time had run out. Madison looked between them, as if hoping the moment would somehow offer an escape route, a compromise, a miracle. None came. She straightened her shoulders. "Come with me," she said to Ethan. He frowned. "Why?" "Because if you do not speak for yourself, I will be forced to speak for you. And I will not speak your story without you in the room." Reluctance shone in his eyes, but he followed her through the hallway, Samuel trailing behind. The walk felt long, heavy with what might come. Every step carried the echo of their conflicting worlds, hers made of legacy and expectation. His built from quiet survival and love for a daughter who depended on him completely. As they neared the auditorium doors, Ethan stopped abruptly. Madison turned startled. "I cannot walk into that room," he said. She took a step back toward him. "Ethan, listen to me." But he lifted a hand, gently silencing her. "I survived losing my wife. I survived losing the company I helped build. I survived rebuilding a life from nothing so my daughter could breathe in peace. But I will not survive watching her suffer because of choices made by adults who cannot leave the past buried." His voice cracked on the last word. It was the first crack Madison had heard, and it shattered something inside her. In that moment, a memory rose in her, her father late at night in his study, telling her that leadership was a lonely place, that sometimes the right decision tore pieces from one's soul. She had always believed she understood that. Now she realized she had never truly known what it meant, until she stood facing the one man willing to lose himself entirely for someone he loved more than truth, more than justice, more than legacy. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Ethan, what do you want me to do?" His breath steadied. "Cancel the announcement. Speak about the future, not the past. Leave my name out of the company's story. And let me walk away when all of this is over." The word struck her like a blow. Walk away. Not a demand, a plea. A line drawn by a man who had already given too much. She felt her throat tighten. She wanted to argue. She wanted to insist that justice mattered. But as she looked at him, truly looked, she saw a father before anything else. And she understood. To honor him, she had to honor the boundaries he fought to preserve. A distant murmur rose from behind the auditorium doors. Time was up. Madison inhaled deeply, battling the weight crushing her chest. Then she nodded slow but resolute. "All right, I will not say your name. Relief washed through Ethan so quietly it was nearly invisible, but it was enough. As Madison stepped through the doors and the lights flooded her, she realized something she had never allowed herself to admit. The truth did not always belong to the world. Sometimes it belonged to the one who paid the highest price for it. Madison Hale stepped onto the stage as the auditorium lights rose slowly, washing over a sea of employees who had gathered without knowing the full truth of why they were there. She stood at the center, spine straight, but heartbeat unsteady, feeling the weight of every expectation pressing against her chest. She had spoken at countless events, yet this moment felt different. Her voice today carried more than corporate optimism or strategic vision. It carried the burden of a truth she had chosen to guard, rather than expose a truth that would remain in the shadows, not because it lacked importance, but because speaking it aloud would fracture the life of someone who had already endured too much. She began calmly, though her voice trembled beneath the surface. Silver Core was not built by chance or luck, she said. It was shaped by minds who believed in what did not yet exist, by people whose contributions were quiet, steady, and often overlooked. The audience listened, sensing a shift in tone they could not yet place. She continued, honoring the early engineers and innovators who laid the groundwork long before the company grew tall enough to touch the skyline. She spoke of sacrifice, a vision of unseen hands that guided the earliest prototypes. Yet she never spoke the one name sitting at the core of every sentence. The omission was deliberate, stitched carefully between respect and protection. When she finished, applause rose like a tide. It was warm, genuine, but unaware of the deeper story pulsing beneath her words. Madison offered a small nod before stepping off the stage. She could not bring herself to look back at the audience. She had made the right choice. Yet the decision carved its own quiet ache inside her, a reminder that leadership demanded not only courage, but restraint. Outside the auditorium, in a corridor dimly lit by afternoon haze, Ethan Walker waited unseen. He had listened through the door as her voice rose and fell, as she honored a history without revealing the soul who created it. Relief steadied his breath. She had kept her promise. His name remained his own, unclaimed by the world that once took everything from him. But the relief carried an undercurrent of bittersweetness. She had fought for him even when he refused to fight for himself. It had been a long time since anyone had done that. When Madison emerged, she found him standing quietly with his toolbox at his side. Their eyes met with an understanding deeper than any victory or defeat. "You protected the truth that mattered to me," Ethan said softly. "Thank you." Madison exhaled a breath she had been holding since dawn. "I honored the truth you asked me to protect, but not the one I wanted to reveal." He shook his head, not in disagreement, but in gratitude. Sometimes concealment is the only way to preserve what is real. She stepped closer, her voice warm, but still carrying the steel of conviction. "If you ever choose to reclaim your place in this company's story, the door will always be open. Your work deserves that." Ethan looked down at the toolbox, running a thumb across the faded emblem. "Maybe one day," he said. "But Emily deserves a life free from the weight of what happened here. That will always come first." Madison hesitated, then asked quietly, "Does she know about what you built?" Ethan smiled gently. "She knows her father fixes things. That is enough for now." The tenderness in his voice struck her unexpectedly. It revealed dimensions she had never considered while navigating contracts and legacy. He was not a fallen inventor or a forgotten founder. He was a father who had chosen love over ambition, and that choice had shaped him more profoundly than any engineering breakthrough. As he turned toward the exit, morning light poured through the glass doors, catching the gold strands in his daughter's hair as she dashed toward him. Emily threw her arms around his waist, her laughter echoing through the lobby. Ethan lifted her with practiced ease, his face softening in a way that erased 10 years of buried pain. "Did you fix everything, Daddy?" she asked. Ethan kissed her forehead. "Not everything, but enough." Madison watched them leave, feeling something shift inside her, a quiet transformation she could neither name nor deny. The truth had not been spoken yet. It lived in the space between them. A truth earned, not displayed. Returning to her office, she gazed out over the city. Silvercore stood tall, but not because of her alone. It stood because of minds like Ethan's hands, like his hearts like his. She understood now that legacy was not carved into the steel beams of the building or the plaques in its lobby. It was carried in the courage to face the past and the compassion to protect those shaped by it. And in that moment, Madison Hale finally felt ready to lead, not the company she inherited, but the one she now understood. In the end, Ethan's story reminds us of a profound truth whispered through every quiet act of resilience. Real power often comes from integrity, not recognition. Many people build extraordinary things without applause, shaping futures in silence, while carrying the weight of invisible sacrifices. As leaders, creators, or simply human beings, we are challenged to recognize the unseen work behind every success, and to choose compassion over pride when faced with someone else's hidden journey. If this story moved you or sparked reflection, make sure to like and subscribe, so you never miss another tale that explores the deeper layers of human strength. And before you go, share your thoughts below with a short phrase that captures what this story meant to you. Just comment respect, Luan.